Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. Today, I want to conclude our two-part series here on fraud in Washington, D.C. We talked a little bit about this on the last podcast, about how, when something's not yours, you don't value it very much. And what happens is that, if you have a stake in something, even if it's just $1 or something, if you have some sort of stake, some sort of skin in the game, you tend to value things and take care of it, right? But when you don't, then, if it's free, why take care of it? And what's been happening is our taxpayer dollars have been going to people. Basically, they look at this and their attitude is, hey, this is free money, right? It's not their money, right? It just comes in from the taxpayers, and we're able to do some skimming, and we're able to do a lot of things with this money that, let's just hide it from the eyes of most people. And what happens, of course, is a lot of things bad happen in the dark, but eventually light will be shown upon them. And when the light gets shown in dark places, things tend to scurry. And so that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of scurrying going on now because of the light that's being shown in the dark places, where a lot of fraud and things have been happening, particularly with taxpayer money. And so let's take a look at what's happening and what we're seeing now in the light. You kind of suspect what's been going on, but now we're starting to see real details about the scurrying that's happening in Washington, D.C. And an investigation's been going on with Doge and some of those others about the African Development Foundation. And it's not the only one, but this is where we're starting. And the Department of Government Efficiency, Doge, has shuttered this small USAID adjacent federal agency called the African Development Foundation over the outrage of Democrats who say it means poor Africans will suffer and public servants will lose their jobs. But the top officials used the agency to advance their own interests and live lives of luxury at the expense of those Africans, while forcing some staff to work without pay and abusing others so badly that they routinely cried. That included helping Herbalife. You remember Herbalife, right? It was a multi-level marketing scheme run by an agency board member. Believe it or not, they helped. They were helping it make inroads in Africa. Now, this individual, John Agwanobi, who served as CEO of Herbalife, was an African Development Fund board member until President Donald Trump fired the board in March. Agency management locked the doors to prevent Doge auditors from entering, and the Trump administration gained access only with the assistance of U.S. Marshals. Now, the standoff made the agency the subject of fawning coverage from media outlets that said that it was standing up for principles. But its employees knew better. Quote, "The hero of the story is actually the villain," one former employee said, speaking on the conditions of anonymity. It was so hard to see the ADF being used as a beacon of hope and resistance against Doge, because I knew what they were actually covering up, and it was horrible things. When I saw that ADF was being celebrated as a David versus Goliath situation, I knew the doors were being kept locked for a reason. In 2020, the African agency partnered with Herbalife at, of course, Agwanobi's behest. And that was 2 months after Herbalife paid a $122 million settlement to the Department of Justice to settle criminal charges that it violated the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. It also paid $200 million to settle Federal Trade Commission charges that it was a pyramid scheme that exploited people into opening money-losing businesses. The African Development Foundation made it seem like the partnership was a nonprofit affiliated with Herbalife, but it was actually with the company itself, which was seeking to expand its reach to Africa. The agency's former general counsel, Matteo Dunn, found, according to materials obtained by the Daily Wire. Now, the grants involved paying 5 Africans $5,000 and providing them product donations and Herbalife nutrition staff as global volunteers in their businesses. This is what partnership materials said. The marketing materials prepared by USADF and Herbalife Nutrition Ltd. reflect that the partnership was being used to drive corporate sales and marketing, not charitable objectives, according to Dunn. Quote, USADF personnel described the partnership with Herbalife Nutrition Ltd. as designed to leverage USADF's network and reputation to promote the Herbalife brand in Africa. That sort of violation of conflict of interest rules was common in the agency, Dunn said. The agency's chief executive from 2016 to 2021, C.D. Glynn, a former Peace Corps DEI officer and later an Obama political appointee to the Peace Corps, had the agency pay $5,000 a year to an organization. This organization was named Root Capital, of which he was a board member. This is what the employees said. Glynn did not file conflict of interest reports and ethic pledges, which are required by law and designed to prevent such situations. For most of the years that he worked there, he didn't do it. He filed one in 2019. But guess what? Omitted Capital Root from it. So there was the use of poverty funds for luxury. In January of 2022, David Atkins, who had been serving as a Joe Biden appointee to USAID, took over as CEO of the African Development Foundation. And he had a lien against him for unpaid federal taxes from 2015 until February of 2021. According to public records, this is true. Landlords in the New York and Washington, D.C. said in court filings that he owed them a lot of money. Employees said both Glynn and Atkins used agency spending to build their personal brands and glad hand with celebrities and billionaires while treating workers with the callous cruelty of which liberals accuse Doge employees, of course. Glynn said the agency pay for him to travel to countries and network at things that had nothing to do with grassroots African economic development. He went to a Scandinavian country, a European country. African countries were there. African countries where there was no ADF program being considered. He was spending ADF money to get to his next job. Another employee said he'd have the agency pay to sponsor conferences in order to buy prominent speaking slots. He'd paid $30,000 to speak at an event. Glynn had the agency pay $1,000 to the boardlist.com, which helps executives get prestigious board seats based on DEI hiring in exchange for that amount, and $7,500 for a Harvard executive class just before leaving the agency, workers said. All of that seems to have paid off. Glynn is now president of PepsiCo Foundation, overseeing $70 million. He went, this is a quote, he went to a Scandinavian country, a European country, African countries were there. No, there was no ADF program being considered at all. He was spending ADF money to get for his next job, and guess what? He got it. Atkins, for his part, brushed off the government rules about travel costs and demanded $1,000 a night hotels, similarly firing an assistant who raised concerns about his travel arrangements. The former assistant told the Daily Wire all about this, speaking on condition of anonymity, and he had a tailor fit him for 3 custom suits and sent the bill to, you guessed it, the agency. The executives seemed more concerned about making the agency look good so congressional funding could continue flowing than they were in actually doing good. One grantee called Vava Coffee violated rules about how it spent grant money, but threatened to publicly disparage the agency as colonizers if the checks didn't keep coming. Glenn ordered disbursement to continue, of course, and employee Kate Ristroff said in an interview obtained by the Daily Wire that she eventually succeeded in terminating the grant. The agency entered into a partnership with the National Basketball Players Association, where NBA players could choose how to spend money in Africa, and American taxpayers would match it. Some of the money was used to build a basketball court, for instance. But there was more than even just fraud. There was a very toxic workplace. The African Development Foundation had a staff of between 30 and 60 and a budget of $45 million. By law, it was permitted to give grants only to African groups and in the amount of $250,000 or less. Glenn and Atkins frequently hired workers as contractors instead of government employees, sometimes directing African funding receipts to, in turn, pay DC bureaucrats to get around rules and hide their overhead costs. There were also other advantages. Hiring workers as contractors meant that they didn't have to follow merit-based hiring practices, prove wrongdoing when firing people, or grant them union protections. The agency appeared so intent on avoiding those protections that it would essentially use government credit cards to pay workers in micro purchases, a petty cash-like payment style that avoids scrutiny from the Treasury Department officials. One contractor described having to restart her employment every 5 weeks, each time being paid by a different pass-through LLC, and sometimes working for long periods without pay. Staff were horribly mistreated by Glenn and Atkins, who acted as if they were global celebrities instead of what amounted to managers of a few dozen people in an obscure organization. Brandy James, the chief of staff, said in a videotaped internal interview, quote, "Toxic would be people crying or things like that. Yeah, we had that. We had Glenn yelling." A junior employee said he soiled himself after Glenn made her afraid of leaving her desk to use the bathroom. She said Glenn would pound his fist and people would walk into his office with their hands shaking. Jeff Galileo, a senior program manager, called Glenn a narcissistic bully who said mean things about almost everybody. Associate General Counsel Nina Bell Mewu said Glenn screamed at her until she cried, and she sought therapy after having physical reactions every time that she thought of him. People were just treated, in my opinion, as disposable, she said. Yale Nager, a senior program analyst, said one employee went on extended sick leave for mental health program because they were so stressed at work. And Glenn's takeaway was, quote, "We need to make sure no one finds out about this," unquote. Employees said they tried to warn PepsiCo against hiring Glenn, sending a letter about the horrific culture and use of money under Glenn, but he was hired anyway. PepsiCo and Glenn did not return any comments, of course, requests for comments. The African Development Foundation Board also received the letter, but despite widespread agreement about Glynn's toxicity, it hired a close friend of Glynn's, Atkins, without Atkins even applying. Atkins said in a deposition that he didn't even apply for it. And many of the patterns continued. On Glassdoor, the website where employees rate their workplaces, the themes were just simply constant. Quote, USADF is a scary place to work. Maybe one day it will be a workplace that is admirable, that has admirable values and care for its staff. Presently, though, it's rotten to the core. This is what one wrote in 2023. Quote, toxic work environment led by narcissists is what another one said that year. After years of mismanagement, I cannot fulfill its potential. Brandy James, the agency's chief of staff, said in an internal email that she tried to use government funds to pay Glassdoor to remove negative posts about the agency, but the site, of course, refused, leaving them visible to everyone who cared to look. And though Doge critics now claim that the African Development Foundation was essential and mourn for their job loss when it was operational, no one showed an interest. It just seemed like there was never going to be any consequences for any of these things, Nagar said. So you can just see the waste and the fraud that was happening just in this one instance alone. But it wasn't the only thing. It wasn't the only dark place that light is being shown on now. A USAID employee in charge of managing contracts for the agency created a fake company to fraudulently secure coronavirus benefits for himself, according to federal prosecutors. Yusuf Akul worked as a senior procurement contract specialist at the U.S. Agency for International Development, the USAID. And this is according to a previous unreported court document. From at least in or around March of 2021 and continuing through at least or in and around August 2021, Akul made maternally false, fictitious, and fraudulent statements that resulted in Akul receiving 2 Paycheck Protection Program loans totaling approximately $16,666 that he said was not entitled to receive. Prosecutors said that in November of 2020, Eckel registered a company in Virginia called Nagoli Counseling LLC. Then applied for a Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP loan, under the coronavirus bailout package, claiming he worked at Nagoli and the money was necessary to prevent job losses. Only companies in operation in February of 2020 were eligible. So he falsely said it was established in January of 2020. And to establish a loss of income, he said the company had $40,000 in income in 2019 when it actually had no income, according to the prosecutors. Akul was accused of making false statements in Washington, D.C. federal court via an information which typically signals a plea deal. And the fact that the money was paid out highlights how carelessly the government distributed mass sums during the coronavirus. The claim that the company had $40,000 in revenue in 2019 contradicts its own claim that it didn't even exist until January of 2020. The fact that Small Business Administration officials didn't check corporation records and catch the fact that it was actually established in November of 2020, or federal tax returns to verify the $40,000, indicate that the government wasn't doing basic database cross-referencing, the kind of thing that the Department of Government Efficiency has made its bread and butter. USAID was shuttered, of course, with its remnants folded into the State Department amidst concerns by Republicans and the Department of Government Efficiency that the money was being mismanaged. And Acol was in charge of hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing to foreign countries where the money could be difficult to monitor, and records showed that. So coronavirus payments were distributed with little vetting under a pay and chase model, right? Where fraudulent claims would ostensibly be recovered later. But the Biden administration quickly gave up on that chase. The Biden administration said in 2023 that it would not seek to collect on loans of less than $100,000 that were required to be paid back, citing equity. Most of the loans were designed to be forgiven, but those who did not meet the requirements were supposed to repay them. That's despite the Small Business Administration's Inspector General saying the move, quote, is not in compliance with applicable criteria, and that not even applying to stop people from cheating the government, well, encouraged future fraud. And of course it would. Congress nearly let the Special Inspector General for Pandemic Recovery, which was set up to police fraud in the pandemic bailout, expire in March of this year, which would have quickly closed the books on the government's largest and most chaotic payment frenzy ever. Senator Ed Markey, he's the Democrat from Massachusetts, said that the Special Inspector General for Pandemic Recovery had only recovered $3 for every dollar spent on its staff, which should have been higher, of course. Courtwatch, which advocated for its continuance, said the Special Inspector General for Pandemic Recovery had meager resources of only a few dozen employees, and that shuttering it down could lead to even less recovery. Courtwatch said the Special Inspector General for Pandemic Recovery had opened inspections into $577 million in suspected fraud. Senator Joni Ernst, the Republican from Iowa, the head of the Senate DOJ caucus, fought to keep the Inspector General, saying, I will not allow fraudsters to get away with stealing hundreds of billions of dollars from taxpayers. The head of LexisNexis Risk Solutions, that's a fun one to say, right, testified to Congress that the criminals stole $1 trillion in COVID money, most of which, of course, went overseas. So you see, it's not the only one. It's not that wasn't the only example of fraud. We see fraud everywhere. We see a lot of fraud that is being uncovered. And what's kind of interesting, this DOJ did a review, and there are 3 states that are really high on the list for fraud. 3 Democratic-led states accounted for the vast majority of unemployment fraud since 2020. And this according to an internal survey of such fraud by the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOJ. The Daily Wire reports that California, New York, and Massachusetts tallied nearly 80%. Those 3 states, California, New York, and Massachusetts, tallied nearly 80% of improper unemployment insurance benefits handed out since 2020. An internal review of claims by DOJ found $382 million in fraudulent payments. The DOJ audit found that, quote, 24.5 thousand people over 115 years old claimed $59 million in benefits. 28,000 people between 1 and 5 years old claimed $254 million in benefits. And 9.7 thousand people with birth dates over 15 years in the future claimed $69 million in benefits. So we have people that aren't even born yet. I guess this is great news, right? This is great news. They have discovered time travel. They have discovered time travel, and I guess they're traveling back to our time to claim benefits. In one case, someone with a birthday in 2154 claimed $41,000. So we know we can do time travel, at least in 2154. Of those flagged claims, California, New York, and Massachusetts accounted for over $300 million. California, New York, and Massachusetts accounted for most of the improper claims, totaling $305 million in unemployment benefits. This according to DOJ. They said that additionally, California accounted for 68% of the unemployment benefits paid to parolees identified by CBP on the terrorist watch list or with criminal records. White House spokesman Harrison Fields said the revelation is an example of the kind of governance that pushed people to move from deep blue states such as California, New York, to Republican-led states such as Texas and California. Quote, there's a reason for the mass exodus from Democrat-run states that have mismanaged their economies and driven residents to the nearest Republican-led state. Fields told Fox News that high taxes, poor stewardship of taxpayer dollars, and progressive policies continue to yield negative results, which is why Americans overwhelmingly support the work of DOJ. California, New York, Massachusetts are under solid Democratic control. Democrats control the governor's office, the state house, and the Senate in each state, while also having the offices of Secretary of State and Attorney General as well. DOJ is spearheading the Trump administration's effort to reduce waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government, and DOJ analysts have been working with government departments to identify potential wasteful spending and spending that does not align with President Donald Trump's policies. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announced $5.1 billion, with a B, in cuts to Pentagon spending that were identified by DOJ. Quote, this one is, as they say, a big one. This is what Hegseth in a video posted on social media said. He says, we're signing a memo right now directing the termination of $5.1 billion in DoD contracts. Not million, that's with a B. $5.1 billion in DoD contracts. So obviously, a lot is happening here. A lot of fraud is getting exposed. And House Speaker Mike Johnson stated that protecting Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid is a top priority for the White House and congressional Republicans, because what's been happening is a lot of liberal Democrats are saying, oh, no, look at all these cuts, going after fraud. Yeah, great, but you're going to slash Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. But in an interview on Fox News, Sunday Morning Features with host Maria Bartiromo, Johnson discussed the recently passed budget reconciliation framework, which sets the stage for President Trump's proposed a comprehensive bill on to advance his domestic priorities. He said this. He says, well, here's the key to all of it. The president has made absolutely clear many times, as we have as well, that we're going to protect Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid for people who are legally beneficiaries of those programs. Johnson said there are a lot of Americans who rely upon those programs, and we have got to ensure that they're safeguarded. That's a big priority for the White House and the Republicans in Congress. And he continued by saying, at the same time, we have to root out fraud, waste, and abuse. We have to eliminate people for example, on Medicaid who are not actually eligible to be there. Able-bodied workers, for example. Young men who should never be on the program at all. Johnson was responding to Bartiromo asking the question, so knowing that 76% of the spending goes toward mandatory spending like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Where are the offsets? Well, Democrats have warned that Republicans, led by Trump and influenced by Doge effort overseen by Elon Musk, are working to dismantle the various programs in a move that would harm millions of seniors, people with disabilities, and other Americans who are reliant on the benefits they offer. But, of course, Johnson argued that preserving resources for those who truly need them, such as young single mothers, people with disabilities, and the elderly on Medicaid, requires preventing others from draining these programs. Quote, "We have got to protect and preserve that program," Johnson said. "So we're going to preserve the integrity of it in this process. We have lots of categories of areas where the government is too large and it does too many things. And the Doge effort and others have highlighted that for the American people." And yes, Doge and other efforts have highlighted a lot of area of darkness, and there's a lot of scurrying going on. And I just don't understand people who would come against that process unless they're getting money. They're seeing the slush fund head their direction. Unless they are capitalizing on this fraud and they're benefiting from it, why would you oppose the light shining in a dark place and watching things scurry? We've highlighted the last two podcasts, this one and the last, of just some outrageously bad fraud and things that needed to be shut down, that needed to have the light shown on it. And I would love to hear from you on it. Maybe you even know of some, or maybe you can highlight stories that we haven't covered here. I would love to hear from you on it. And of course, you can always do that at uncommonsense.podcast.com. We're on YouTube, of course, and you can you can go on there and you can subscribe to us. We would love to have you share that. Give us a thumbs up, and thank you for listening. This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.